The Territory of Oklahoma was an organized incorporated territory of the United States that existed from May 2, 1890, until November 16, 1907, when it was joined with the Indian Territory under a new constitution and admitted to the Union as the State of Oklahoma. The 1890 Oklahoma Organic Act organized the western half of Indian Territory in a strip of country known as No Man's Land into Oklahoma Territory. Reservations in the new territory were then opened to settlement in land runs later that year, and in 1891 and 1893, 7 counties were defined upon the creation of the territory. Although they were designated by number, they would eventually become Logan County, Cleveland County, Oklahoma County, Canadian County, Kingfisher County, Payne County, and Beaver County. The land run of 1893 led to the addition of Kay County, Grant County, Woods County, Garfield County, Noble County, and Pawnee County. The territory acquired an additional county through the resolution of a boundary dispute with the U.S. state of Texas, which today is split into Greer County, Jackson County, Harmon County, and part of Beckham County. History. Organization. Oklahoma Territory's history began with the Indian Intercourse Act of 1834, when the United States Congress set aside land for Native Americans. At the time, the land was unorganized territory that consisted of the federal land west of the Mississippi and not within the states of Missouri and Louisiana, or the territory of Arkansas. By 1856, the territory had been reduced to approximately the modern-day borders of the state of Oklahoma, except for the Oklahoma Panhandle and Old Greer County. These lands became known as Indian Territory, as they had been granted to certain Indian nations under the Indian Removal Act, in exchange for their historic territories east of the Mississippi River. Until this point, Native Americans had exclusively used the land. In 1866, after the American Civil War, the federal government required new treaties with the tribes that had supported the Confederacy, and forced them into land and other concessions. As a result of the Reconstruction treaties, the 5 civilized tribes were required to emancipate the slaves and offer them full citizenship in the tribes if they wanted to stay in the nations. This forced many of the tribes in Indian Territory into making concessions. U.S. officials forced the cession of some 2 million acres of land in the center of the Indian Nation territory. Elias C. Boudinot, then a railroad lobbyist, wrote an article that was published in the Chicago Times on February 17, 1879, that popularized the term unassigned lands to refer to this tract. Soon the popular press began referring to the people agitating for its settlement as boomers. To prevent settlement of the land by European Americans, President Rutherford B. Hayes issued a proclamation forbidding unlawful entry into Indian Territory in April 1879. David Payne and the boomers, despite federal obstruction, popular demands for the land did not end. Captain David L. Payne was one of the main supporters of the opening of Oklahoma to white settlement. Payne traveled to Kansas, where he founded the Boomer Colonial Association. Payne's organization of 10,000 members hoped to establish a white colony in the unassigned lands. The formation of the group prompted President Hayes to issue a proclamation ordering Payne not to enter Indian Territory on February 12, 1880. In response, Payne and his group traveled to Camp Palace in the unassigned lands east of Oklahoma City. There, they made plans for a city, which they named Ewing. The 4th Cavalry arrested them, took them to Ft. Reno and escorted them back to Kansas. Payne was furious, as public law prohibited the military from interfering in civil matters. The federal government freed Payne and his party, effectively denying them access to the courts. Anxious to prove his case in court, Payne and a larger group returned to Ewing in July. The army again arrested the party and escorted them back to Kansas. Again they were freed, but this time the federal government charged Payne with trespassing under the Indian Intercourse Act. He went to trial in F.D. Smith, Arkansas. Judge Isaac Parker ruled against Payne and fined him the maximum amount of $1,000. Since Payne had no money and no property, the government could not collect the fine. The ruling settled nothing on the question of the public domain lands, and Payne continued his activities. Payne tried a third time to enter the unassigned lands. In December, Payne and his group moved along the northern border of Indian Territory. They were followed by a unit of cavalry under the command of Colonel J.J. Copinga. Colonel Copinga warned Payne that if he crossed the border that they would be forcibly resisted. As the number of boomers grew as people joined Payne, they sent a messenger to President Hayes asking permission to enter Indian Territory. After weeks of no response, Payne led his followers to the unassigned lands. Once again, they were arrested and Payne was sent back to Fort Smith. He was found guilty and sentenced to pay a $1,000 fine. Upon his release, he returned to Kansas, where he spent the next 4 years trying to open Oklahoma. During Payne's last venture, this time into the Cherokee Outlet in 1884, the Army again arrested him. They took him several hundred miles under severe physical circumstances over a tortuous route to F.D. Smith. The public was outraged about his treatment by the military, and the U.S. government decided to try his case. Payne was turned over to the United States District Court at Topeka, Kansas. He was indicted for the crime of bringing whiskey into Indian Territory, a federal offense. In the full term, Judge Cassius G. Foster quashed the indictments and ruled that settling on the unassigned lands was not a criminal offense. The boomers celebrated, but the federal government refused to accept the decision. Payne immediately planned another expedition, but he would not lead it. On November 28, 1884, in Wellington, Kansas, the morning after a late-night address to the boomers, he collapsed and died. William Couch, and the opening after Payne's death, his associate, William L. Couch, assumed the leadership role. Couch moved the boomers into Indian Territory and founded Camp Stillwater on December 12, 1884. President Chester Arthur sent a small detachment of troops to escort Couch out of the territory. When the soldiers arrived, 200 armed men met them and refused to move. After 600 troops arrived as reinforcements, the officers gave the boomers the choice of leaving within 48 hours or being apprehended. After the boomers refused to leave, the commanders moved the troops across the Kansas border and cut off Couch's supply lines. Soon, the food was gone, and Couch and the other boomers were escorted back to Kansas. In response to Couch's claims that the federal government was discriminating against them, on March 3, 1885, Congress approved the Indian Appropriations Act of 1885. This act authorized negotiations for the cession of unoccupied lands belonging to the Creek, the Seminole, and the Cherokee Indians. Couch stopped being a colonist and became a lobbyist. Couch would spend 4 years in Washington, D.C., trying to convince Congress to open the Oklahoma lands. Many Indians from the 5 civilized tribes lobbied against Couch's actions. In January 1889, Pleasant Porter led a group of Muskogee who offered to sell their unoccupied lands. Within weeks, they sold their unassigned lands to the United States. These lands embraced less than 3 million acres in the heart of Indian Territory. On March 2, 1889, Congress passed an amendment amendment to the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871, which provided for the creation of homestead settlements in the unassigned lands, to be known as Oklahoma Territory. President Grover Cleveland announced that the Oklahoma lands would be opened on April 22 via land run. The land run took place at noon and was open to individuals of at least 21 years of age. Land Run and the Sooners. The Land Run of 1889, the first land run in the territory's history, opened Oklahoma Territory to settlement on April 22, 1889. Over 50,000 people entered the lands on the first day, among them thousands of freedmen and descendants of slaves. Couch and his boomers, now numbering approximately 14,000, also entered the race. Those who entered Oklahoma before the official start of the race were called Sooners. The term referred to the Sooner Clause in the Indian Appropriations Act of March 2, 1889, which said that anyone who violated the official start would be denied a claim to the land. When the run began at noon, men on thousands of horses, wagons, buggies, carts, and vehicles rushed across to Oklahoma. The law-abiders fought with the Sooners on several instances. Illegal pioneer shot and wounded William Couch, a Sooner. He died on April 21, 1890, as a result of his wounds. Many lawsuits resulted because more than one person claimed a particular piece of land. Often this involved trying to determine which party was a legal claimant. A portion of the cases even went as far as the U.S. Supreme Court. When the race was over, many disappointed pioneers were forced to leave the area without any claim. Of the 14,000 boomers, only 1,000 had made claims. Tent cities grew overnight at Oklahoma City, Kingfisher, El Reno, Norman, Guthrie, and Stillwater, which were the first of the large settlements. Early territorial period. By the end of the day on April 22, 1889, there were more than enough settlers in the unassigned lands to require creation of a territorial government. However, the brief legislation that provided for the opening of the land called for no form of government in Oklahoma. No local police or courts were established. Federal military troops provided law enforcement, and the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas under federal Judge Isaac Parker was the only form of criminal and civil jurisdictions. Despite that, the district was generally peaceful. Most land disputes were settled without bloodshed, although a few took years to resolve. For over a year the people of Oklahoma Territory were semi-autonomous. The next year, on May 2, 1890, Congress passed the Oklahoma Organic Act, which organized the western half of Indian Territory into Oklahoma Territory. The eastern half remained under Indian rule, predominantly that of the 5 civilized tribes, as Indian Territory. Congress included in Oklahoma Territory the strip of country known as No Man's Land, embracing 3,681,000 acres, which became Beaver County. In September 1890, the 1,282,434 acres of the Sac and Fox, Iowa, and Potawatomi reservations in the eastern part of Oklahoma Territory were opened to settlement. The following spring, the 4,397,771 acres of Cheyenne and Arapaho lands in the center of the territory were opened. On September 16, 1893, the Cherokee Outlet was opened to settlement, and the counties of Kay, Grant Woods, Woodward, Garfield, Noble, and Pawnee were created from its 6,014,239 acres of land. In 1895 the Kikipu Reservation of 206,662 acres was settled, and the year following Greer County, which had been considered a portion of Texas, was given to the territory by a decision of the Supreme Court of the United States. These developments with the Kiowa, Comanche and Apache and Wichita reservations just opened, gave Oklahoma Territory a settled area of 24 million acres, 1,725,646 acres of which was still included in Indian reservations. Path to statehood. With the passage of the Organic Act of 1890, Oklahoma Territory existed from 1890 to 1907. During that time, 7 governors administered the territory. During its 17-year existence, little of note occurred due to the growing idea of statehood, which had originated in Indian Territory. Most of the governors stayed in office for only a few months. Institutions founded during this time were the University of Oklahoma, the University of Central Oklahoma, and the Oklahoma State University. The territory's real purpose was to serve as a transitional government from unorganized territory to state. Representatives of the 5 civilized tribes met in 1902 to work on securing statehood for Indian Territory and held a convention in Eufaula. The representatives met again in 1903 to organize a constitutional convention. The Sequoia Constitutional Convention met in Muskogee on August 21, 1905. General Pleasant Porter, principal chief of the Creek Nation, was elected as president of the convention. The elected delegates decided that the executive officers of the 5 civilized tribes would be appointed as vice presidents. William C. Rogers, principal chief of the Cherokees, William H. Murray, appointed by Chickasaw Governor Douglas H. Johnston to represent the Chickasaw, Chief Green McCurtain of the Choctaw, Chief John Brown of the Seminole, and Charles N. Haskell, appointed by Porter to represent the Creek. The convention drafted a constitution, drew up a plan of organization for the government, put together a map showing the counties to be established, and elected delegates to go to the United States Congress to petition for statehood. The convention's proposals were presented in a referendum in Indian Territory, in which they were overwhelmingly endorsed. The delegation received a cool reception in Washington. Eastern politicians, fearing the admission of 2 more western states, put pressure on the U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. He ruled that the Indian and Oklahoma territories would be granted statehood only as a combined state. The hard work of the Sequoia State Constitutional Convention was not entirely lost. When representatives from Indian Territory joined the Oklahoma State Constitutional Convention in Guthrie the next year, they brought their constitutional experience with them. The Sequoia Constitution served in large part as the basis for the Constitution of the State of Oklahoma, which came into being with the merger of the 2 territories in 1907. Territorial Governor Frank Frantz oversaw the transition from territory to state. He was selected as the Republican nominee to serve as the state's first governor. He faced the Democratic Charles N. Haskell in the election on September 17, 1907. In the same election, the Oklahoma Constitution was proposed. The Constitution was passed and Haskell was elected governor. Once the people of Oklahoma adopted the United States Constitution on November 16, 1907, Oklahoma and Indian Territories officially dissolved and the state of Oklahoma was admitted to the Union as the 46th state government. With the passage of the Oklahoma Organic Act in June 1890, the territorial government came into existence. The territorial government had no constitution except for sections of the Organic Act creating it, which served as a semi-governing document. The Organic Act provided for a complete organization of the territory, defined the functions of the territorial government, placed limitations upon the acts of the Legislative Assembly as well as that of the territorial officers. It also designated the town of Guthrie as the territorial capital. Congress provided for the creation of a legislative branch elected by the people, but the executive and judicial branches of the territories were selected and appointed by the President of the United States, with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. The appointees included a governor, a secretary, 3 federal judges and a marshal. President Benjamin Harrison appointed George Washington Steele, a Republican from Indiana, as the first territorial governor. Legislative branch. The Organic Act called for the establishment of a bicameral territorial legislative assembly composed of a territorial council, the upper house of the assembly, and territorial house of representatives, the lower house of the assembly. The assembly could only create laws consistent with the Constitution of the United States and the Organic Act, but did not require the consent of Congress to take effect. They had the same force of law as did a law passed by a regular state government. Laws enacted by the Assembly could be suspended by the President of the United States or revoked, in part or in their entirety, by an act of Congress. When George Washington Steele, the first territorial governor, took office, he issued an executive order on July 8, 1890, calling for the first elections to the Assembly. The date set for this election was August 5, 1890. The Assembly was to have convened August 12, but owing to the death of 2 members-elect, a special election was called and the convening of the legislature was postponed until August 27, 1890. The Territorial Assembly met for 120-day sessions in Guthrie, Oklahoma. The first legislative session was narrowly divided between Republican and Democratic Party members, with Republicans having a slight edge in representatives. However, the Democrats allied with delegates from the People's Party and thereby controlled both houses. Populist delegates were elected as presiding officers in both. The legislators spent most of the session arguing about the locations of the Capitol, the State University, State Teachers College, and the Agricultural School. Only near the end of the session did they begin to address other issues necessary to create and maintain the territory. Steele became so disgusted by the political stalemate that he resigned his position and returned to Indiana. The Oklahoma Territorial Legislature met for the last time in 1905. Executive Branch. The executive branch was made up of officials appointed by the U.S. President, including a territorial governor, a territorial secretary, and a territorial marshal. Appointees were subject to the consent of the United States Senate, served 4-year terms, and could be removed by the President. The territorial governor was vested with the executive power of the territory, was responsible for ensuring that its laws were faithfully executed, and served as the symbol of the federal government in the territory. The governor was the ex officio commander-in-chief of the territorial militia and the federal troops in the territory, as well as ex officio superintendent of Indian Affairs. The governor possessed the power to grant pardons for offenses against the laws of the territory. He also could grant reprieves for offenses against the laws of the United States until the president made his decision on the matter. It was also the duty of the governor to outline the boundaries of the counties, name the county seats, and to appoint territorial and county officers with the consent of the territorial council. Laws passed passed by the Territorial Assembly had to be presented to the governor for his approval. If he did not approve, he would veto it and return it to the Assembly for reconsideration. The governor's veto could only be overridden by a two-thirds vote of the Territorial Assembly. The governor also had the right to convene the Assembly into a special session. The Territorial Secretary would serve as the chief assistant to the governor and, in the event of a vacancy of the governorship, the Secretary would serve as the acting governor until the President appointed a new one. The Secretary was responsible for recording and preserving the laws and proceedings of the Assembly and the acts and proceedings of the governor. A copy of the same would semi-annually be submitted to the President of the United States Senate, and the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives for the review. A territorial attorney was responsible for giving legal advice to the governor and Assembly, served as the chief law enforcement official of the territory, and represented Oklahoma Territory and the United States in court cases. The territorial marshal was responsible for protecting the court system and for executing processes issued from the territorial courts. List of governors. Judicial Branch. The territory's judiciary consisted of a territorial Supreme Court made up of 3 justices, a chief justice and 2 associate justices. Additional associate justices were added later as more counties were created in the territory. The judiciary was given a wide jurisdiction. It functioned not only as a United States federal court, but its jurisdiction extended to a trial of cases both civil and criminal, arising under the code enacted by the Territorial Assembly. The court could sit half of the day as a federal court and the other half as territorial court. It would also serve as a Supreme Court and hear cases that had been appealed from territories' lower courts. President Benjamin Harrison appointed Edward B. Green of Illinois as the first Chief Justice and John G. Clark of Wisconsin and Abraham J. C. of Missouri as the first Associate Justices. Oklahoma Territory was divided into 7 judicial districts in 1902, as follows. 1st, Logan, Lincoln and Payne counties. 2nd, P. Canadian, Kingfisher, Cleveland, Washita and Custer counties. 3rd, Oklahoma and Pottawatomie counties. 4th, Noble, Kay and Pawnee counties. 5th, Garfield, Grant, Blaine and Roger Mills counties. 6th, Woods, Woodward, Beaver, Day and Dewey counties. 7th, Caddo, Comanche, Kiowa and Greer counties. Charles Brown of Kansas was named the first Attorney General and Horace Speed of Guthrie was appointed the first United States Attorney in Oklahoma. Federal representation. The territory was entitled to elect 1 delegate to the United States House of Representatives to serve a 2-year term. While unable to vote in the full House, the delegate was allowed to vote in a House committee of which the delegate was a member. The first territorial representative was David A. Harvey. 4 men represented Oklahoma Territory as non-voting delegates in the United States House of Representatives. Lands that came to make up the territory. Unassigned lands. April 22, 1889 opened by Land Run. No Man's Land. May 2, 1890 assigned to Oklahoma Territory by Organic Act. Iowa Reserve. September 22, 1891 opened by Land Run. Sac and Fox Reserve. September 22, 1891 opened by Land Run. Tonkawa Reserve 1891 allotment. Citizen Potawatomi and Absentee Shawnee Reserve. September 22, 1891 opened by Land Run. Cheyenne or Arapaho Reserve. April 19, 1892 opened by Land Run. Cherokee Outlet. September 17, 1893 opened by Land Run. Kickapoo Reserve. May 4, 1896 opened by Land Run. Greer County, March 16, 1896, officially assigned to Oklahoma Territory, Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache Reserve, July 10 through August 6, 1901 lottery. Wichita and Caddo Reserve, July 10 through August 6, 1901 lottery. Ponca and Oto Missouri Reserve 1904 allotment, Core Reserve 1906 allotment, Osage Reserve 1906 allotment, Big Pasture, December 1906 sealed bid.